Good evening. Welcome to the December 20th Design Review Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The Design Review Committee is a subcommittee of the Historic Zoning Commission. The meeting is informal and designed to guide applicants through the process of obtaining a certificate of appropriateness or COA for projects within the city's historic districts in light of the Historic District Design Guidelines. Applicant participation in DRC meetings is voluntary but highly recommended. Changes made or suggestions taken by the applicant based on discussions with the DRC are the applicant's choice, but the DRC makes no representation as to whether any changes or suggestions made during the meeting will be approved by the voting body, which is the Historic Zoning Commission. There are 5 items on this afternoon's agenda. When your item is called, please introduce yourself and generally describe your item in about 3 to 5 minutes. Please focus on the specific points of your project that you want the DRC to discuss. And with that, we'll come to item 1. And we put some time, try to have some time limits on each item tonight. So the first one we've got is, and each item will be about 20 minutes. So if the first item is discussion of preliminary historic zoning recommendation for Emmeline Acres subdivision proposed at southeast and southwest corners of the intersection at Mack Hatcher Parkway and Franklin Road. Kaiser Vogren Design applicant. Amanda?
So really quickly, I just want to give a brief background on this project. It has appeared before the DRC a few times in the Historic Zoning Commission last month. It was recommended by the Historic Zoning Commission that the applicant hold a site visit at the property at which the proposed buildings would be staked and the setbacks would be indicated. The applicant did host that meeting near the end of November. That was extremely helpful. Thank you very much, Gary and Christian, for doing that. And they would like to provide more illustrative information to you based on those discussions and then seek additional feedback. So I'll turn it over to Gary.
Thank you. Gary?
Got the button
Welcome.
pushed. Okay. Thank you, Amanda. Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Gary Vogren with Kaiser Vogren Design. Good to see you all again. I'll keep this very brief. It's basically to listen to you all. We had a great site visit. It was good to see things in the field, the site conditions, general characteristics. It's one thing seeing it from the road, but it's another to walk through the site and see what's going on there as opposed to driving by it every day. Knowing the factors of the church, the railroad tracks, the highway noise, and things of that nature. So I appreciate that. I think it's a very valued experience. I appreciate you bringing that and offering that solution. So basically, based on that visit, we'd like to listen to what you have to say about the visit. But I'd also like to request that we share a few images that some of the members had asked that we show some 3D characteristic images. They're in progress, so they're just working documents, but we want to show some vantage points from Franklin Road and internally to get your feedback on that. And then basically just discuss the last report that Kelly and Amanda prepared, that they were much appreciative of the Franklin Road corridor and what we're trying to preserve in terms of the rural character, separation of buildings, the lot sizes being basically a half acre to 1.5 acre size lots along Franklin Road. Very generous setbacks and 150 to 160 foot setbacks, so that was positive. But really needed to define the central internal lots along the railroad tracks or against the church on the west side, and what that minimum lot size that you would like to see based on what you saw on the site. Is it something more similar to what maybe have done in Miles Manor across from Jasmine Grove? Maybe the minimum internal lots are 50 to 55 feet wide, because you can go out there and see those ones across from Jasmine Grove. Is that something that's comparable? Because they're against the church, they're against the railroad tracks, they're internal, they're buffered by the larger estate, half acre, 1.5 acre lots along Franklin Road. So some guidance there. With this information, we can then go to really start to design these homes on these lot-specific sites. If we can get a kind of a general range of what those lot sizes need to be, then come back with really defined architecture to show you how those lots fit on those, or those buildings fit on those lots, what the setbacks will be, front, sides, rear, how they work, so that will be helpful. And there was a couple questions, comments. Hello, Mary. There was a couple questions, comments on site about the perimeter screening along Mack Hatcher and what you may see from the church. So with that, Amanda, if you want to show a couple of those 3D.
So I have the renderings up, and you go ahead and let me know when you'd like me to switch to the next one.
Well, describe this one. Where is this?
This is along Franklin Road. Probably looking to your right as you're traveling north on Franklin Road towards MacHatcher. Immediately to the foreground of the screen, you'll see kind of a gate fencing where there's grass pavers. That is kind of the mid-block of the eastern tract where the emergency access, the trail will be. And then those two homes on the right are minimum 150-foot setback off of Franklin Road, off the right-of-way. They're probably another 50 to 60 feet off the street. So you're standing in the street here, so you're at about 8-foot high level on this rendering here, looking into the site. The horse rail fence up front along Franklin Road along the right-of-way, providing an open meadow, pastoral feel in front of the buildings, and maybe with some ancillary street tree plantings as well. But that's kind of, this is the big house model along Franklin Road, these two buildings. They're generally 50 feet wide to up to 65 feet wide. Rear load garages, so you do not see garages from Franklin Road. They're all rear loaded, but meant to look like a single family home. Let's try the next image, Amanda.
So Gary, just to clarify, in looking at this, and this is the first time I've seen this, this appears to me as if you're driving south and looking at the west side of the property. I just wanted to clarify if that's
Driving
the case.
south from the west
Because in the
side.
background here, this looks like it would be more of Harlansdale Farm and not Roper's Knob.
The reason I say it was going towards MacHatcher, because it looks like the grade is going up.
So I'll just go to the next slide
Yeah.
and perhaps we can figure that out.
Yeah, so this one is on the eastern tract, and you can see the little, the water station that's in front there that everybody saw on site. So these are the buildings on the eastern tract, actually showing 3 home sites on this site. Again, these are half-acre to 1-acre lots. So immediately to the right would be Creekside Estate, behind that vegetation. So these are showing what these big houses could look like, 150 feet back, 160 feet back from the right-of-way Franklin Road. See the generous separation of the building forms between each other, trying to match Harlansdale Manor across the street that Amanda and Kelly had suggested. And then you can see the foothills behind it, but this kind of shows that eastern tract of 3 structures on this location. Is there another one, Amanda, or is that the only 2?
So here's the next slide. I think this is continuing on the east side of the property.
Yes.
You're just seeing the frontage lots. You're not seeing the development that's proposed
That's right.
behind.
So again, moving up Franklin Road, traveling north from that little water station that Mallory Valley owns. These are showing the continuation of the big house estates along Franklin Road, 150 feet back, 150, 160 feet back. Between those two where those people are walking, that is the proposed trail that, the trail/emergency access for fire trucks. Yeah, right there, Amanda, where that gate is. That is really meant to be grass paved with a trail or multi-purpose trail in the middle. That it basically just looks like a trail, but a fire truck could drive through it if it needed to for emergency access. So that's why you see that large separation between the 2 middle home sites. And that separation is like 120 feet separation, or 110 feet separation between those 2. And the others are 55 to 65 feet apart between those 2 buildings. But it shows kind of that flavor and character that we like to promote along Franklin Road, to provide that visual, uncongested gateway, as we've talked about in the Franklin Road. That's similar to one we just looked at previously with the little building in front, Creekside Estate, where Amanda's mouse is at right there with the vegetation preserved with the addition of the 75-foot conservation easement. So we're saving the trees around Creekside Estate, supplementing that with landscape vegetation per the zoning code, but also shows the flavor of the building and character along Franklin Road and the massing that we're trying to achieve along Franklin Road. But maintaining that character, and each one of these elevations obviously has to come before your board to see those. So that, we're starting to sweep internally. Again, these are progress. This is kind of going internal to the site, showing another big house structure. This is in progress. As I mentioned, we like to we're not going to show all this landscaping along the streetscape, particularly on the back of the curb. They got a little artistic license in here when they did these, so, but it's more about the flavor of the streetscape, the on-street parking, reloaded access, just showing the massing of the building through that location. Another streetscape shot internally on the eastern tract. Again, some big house structures located here, on-street parking, showing the building separation. And typically in the big houses located internally, they would have a minimum setback between those of, make sure I get this right,
I believe it's 5 to 7.5 feet.
7.5, so minimum 15 feet separation between the big houses internally. Again, they're more than that, but a minimum 15, but others are 30 to 40 feet separation. This one shows more the depiction of the 15 feet separation of the big houses. This is a snapshot of the single-family residential facing the church on the western tract. These are the proposed 40 to 55-foot wide lots along the church edge. So that street is paralleling Daniel McMahon Drive. Yes, yes, yes. And alley in the back. So that street is paralleling the property line adjacent to the church. So all these units are facing the church, looking either into their future sanctuary or their parking lot. So we wanted to address the church front load elements, and the church was very appreciative of that as opposed to an alley loaded. So these are the single-family lots fronting that edge. Again, we like to landscape that edge. There's an existing historic wall that's along that property line that needs to be preserved. There's a multi-use trail that's adjacent to that also along the church that was built adjacent to their driveway. So it's another just great interconnectivity from these residents to that trail, to either the church or the Howelldale Farm or to downtown. It just shows the flavor of these character of these homes. And those are the lot sizes we want to talk to you about internally. You know, what size do we want to really focus on internally there? So, so I appreciate your opportunity to have me show those to you. So we were just really, our client Christian Dial is here as well, who you met on site. One other thing I just wanted to mention was that, just to give you a framework, because there was a question that Amanda raised about, well, we see the lot sizes along the western tract adjacent to the church, their parking lot and the open field and their potential future sanctuary are shown as 40s to 50-foot wide lots along the western side. She was unclear of the lot sizes on the eastern tract that are internal to the site, and those range from 45 to 70 feet wide.
Yes, I'm seeing several 45, some
Yep.
50, 70. There's multiplex that are 50, 60, 105, 90.
Right. Yes. So obviously, the ones with the four circles are the big houses, multiplexes, and then the one with the single circle in the middle, those are single-family homes. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Any questions you have, or Christian come up as well, but appreciate your time, and thank you for the site visit last time.
Okay,
I think I'd like to
Okay, go ahead, Amanda.
reiterate that the role of the Historic Zoning Commission is to provide a recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the BOMA on contextual considerations, rather, that relate to our design guidelines for the historic district, specifically this property, these two properties. So the main considerations that we've laid before the commission at this time would be the appropriateness of building forms. So what we've asked the applicant to provide would be the lot dimensions, because they shape building form, and the proposed setbacks. You do see that there are various lot sizes for the multiplex units, which are 4 units to a building, as well as the single family. So keep in mind that we're looking at the individual building forms, how they relate to each other, the shapes that they create, the lots create for the buildings themselves. And while we're not specifically looking at architecture, it's really important to consider that certain contextually appropriate architectural styles, whatever district they're in, may have different massing than others. So for example, I believe a commissioner at one point stated that what would be contextually appropriate in this district would be more of a wider mass of vernacular that's similar to Creekside, the historic estate adjacent to this. And so the wider lots should accommodate a wider building form for appropriateness. So what Mr. Bogren is asking today is, number one, how well do you believe that the applicant has proposed the frontage lots, the lots that front Franklin Road on either side, as far as the building forms and the setbacks for those building forms for the context of Franklin Road? And number two, what would be appropriate lot dimensions at the rear? Now, I have provided that, the Historic Zoning Commission doesn't typically provide with numbers that we relate to building forms, a building form that may be appropriate. The building forms that have been provided by the applicant don't all necessarily fall into the dimensions provided here, so we have asked the applicant to provide building elevations that would in fact fit on all of these lots, and so the commission can review those forms and determine their appropriateness to the district themselves. So I hope that helps clarify the applicant's questions, and I'm happy to answer any you may have for staff as well.
Amanda, refresh everybody on what the current zoning is and what the capacity on these properties would meet that zoning, and then what is planned,
Sure.
what that capacity would be.
Sure. So anytime an applicant is requesting a different use or a different density than is permitted by zoning, then it requires what we call a rezoning. Right now, the properties are zoned estate residential, which is essentially single-family forms at 1 building per 2 acres. So since the applicant is requesting to have more buildings than that, then the zoning is being requested to be changed to what is called planned district, in which the applicant defines a request for their own density based on what they would like to propose. In this case, they are proposing to use the conservation subdivision method as prescribed by Envision Franklin, which would recommend that single-family be the primary use on both of these lots, and that multiplex, aka a big house structure with 4 units inside, may be appropriate as well. You could also propose duplex, which would be 2 units per single building. The applicant's choosing not to propose that at this time, but the request as proposed would require a PD district rezoning, added density to be defined by the applicant and reviewed and considered by all applicable parties at the city level. Anything to add to that? Right.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, so
Let me go back to the minutes from our last month where I talk about that I would like to see at least 125 feet in lot width with the style, for instance, pulling on Federal, Greek Revival, or Full Victorian. I still stand to that. And I don't really feel like we can compare this to Miles Manor. Miles Manor is an in-town development. This is reading like a suburban development, and that concerns me. When you have a multiplex, it affects the fenestration, and so the windows and doors don't necessarily land in the same place they would on a single-family dwelling. It also affects the form, scale, and architecture, and then creates more doors and more sidewalks. So the building setbacks, of course, are small relative to what you would see in Harlansdale. And then one of the areas that I noted is that the area that I guess it's a triangular section that's on Franklin Road, that the vegetation that is there now is not really going to be sufficient to hide any of this development, and it's not, as I understand it, does not belong to this property. And then the last thing I want to say is that when we were at the site, I looked up and I saw Roper's Knob. And I thought, okay, people go up to the top of Roper's Knob. This is like, our Monticello. Franklin's all about the Battle of Franklin. And so I think it's really important that we think about the view shed from Roper's Knob and try to protect at least a sense of that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Don't everybody speak at once.
I'll go next.
Okay, Mary.
May I ask a quick question? Just for clarity for the applicant, Ms. Besser, when you say 125-foot width based on the infill across the street at Harlansdale Manor, do you mean that just for the frontages or also for the interior lots?
For the single-family houses,
Okay.
yeah. that's
Thank
what-
you.
Yeah, thank you.
For all lot through both sides, 125 feet?
Right, right, and the multiplex is in a class by itself, so I'm not even going to address that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mary?
Mr. Chair, at the on-site visit, it was mentioned by the commissioners of, at the current zoning, what would a project look like? Not to spend a lot of time on it, but just something to see what that could look like. There was, years ago, an enormous community effort to make sure that Franklin Road would be saved forever, and historic overlay zoning was placed on it. This property was down-zoned to 1 unit to the 2 acres with huge community support and a 5-2 vote by the then sitting Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And I guess someone could put a price tag on what this entrance means to Franklin. But I know that I've, many times when I've been downtown at a festival, had somebody from here come and say, oh, I drive down Franklin Road and I know I'm still in Franklin. This is emotional for me. It just is. I helped get the funding to purchase Roper's Knob and participated in both of those efforts. And I cannot see how this in any way preserves, as it's being envisioned right now, preserves the historic character of Franklin. And our job as the Historic Zoning Commission is to manage change over time to preserve the historic character of Franklin. It's been our calling card. So I would like to see something that is based on current zoning.
Not to change it.
Huh?
Not to change the current.
No.
I just want, I just want to make sure I understand.
I'm trying to be clear because I think it's fair to be clear to the people coming before us. Polite is nice, but clear sometimes isn't as polite, so.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair, to continue what Mary was saying, that was 21 years ago, so that was in the year 2000. And the discussion that OMA had about zoning in state residential had to do with the same issues the board is bringing up, and that is that it's a gateway into Franklin, and that it's adjacent to historic Roper's Knob. And so the Heritage Foundation did raise the funds to purchase Roper's Knob, and the city talked about making a park there. So what I have to say is, first of all, thank you for the site visit. I know that was, it cost money to do that in
Yes.
time, and we appreciate it very much. One thing I became really aware is that 150 feet in Franklin Road did not seem that far to me. I know when we see the Google map where the buildings have been imposed on Google Maps, which are kind of distorted, it looks further away, but when you're actually on site, you realize how close you really are to Franklin Road. And then you see Roper's Knob, and then you realize that, and I hear this as a negative that comes from the applicant, that the railroad track is a negative, the floodplain's a negative, the noise on Franklin Road's a negative. Therefore, we need more houses in here to support the kind of price that, because you can't get really a good price for it. I kind of like to see it differently. Because of Roper's Knob, it'll never be development because the city owns it. You have a floodplain, which is that will never be developed.
Yeah, on the other side of the railroad tracks, yeah.
On the other side of the railroad tracks.
Yep.
And I think it would be a very desirable property. And there are many of us that live on very busy streets.
Oh, yeah.
And to support what Ms. Pierce was saying about the current zoning, So I think that would give roughly around 22 houses on the east side and roughly 8 or 9 on the west side. And I'd like to encourage you to go back and consider making this development work with that kind of, those type of housing in, or number of houses on each side. And then design it so that you do have the rural character, still supported that our guidelines suggest. And that would be my suggestion, but I couldn't support or recommend to the Planning Commission that the development as we see it now should be approved.
Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, and that rural character that you're referring to cannot be achieved by doubling the number of homes, which it would be. Presently, the number of homes, as you mentioned, Brian, are 22 on the eastern side and about 10 on the western side. And based on my count, we're talking about twice that on both sides.
Yeah, there's about 62 lots total.
62.
Yeah. And even though zoning certainly is not within our purview, I think we can all agree that zoning and density go hand in hand. The density that we're discussing here is incompatible with the adjoining properties. It's incompatible with the agricultural nature that we're trying to preserve. And I'm sorry, this is not what you want to hear, obviously, but we're doing our jobs here. And the recommendation that I will be making to BOMA is to not support the plan as it is now.
We appreciate the clear, direct feedback. You're not hurting our feelings at all. So, yeah, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Kathy?
I'd also just like to add on, when we were at the site visit, it was very, very good to go and trudge through the corn crops. And, just get the feel of it. And like Brian had mentioned too, I felt that the scale of what we were looking at with what you had marked off in the little balloons, to give us the height regulation, I felt like it was very tight. I thought it would feel bigger, but it felt very closed in. And one of my final comments right before we left there was to ask you what would be the minimal number of units, hence lots, that could work as a development out there. I feel Ms. Besser kind of tidied it up today with the word of a suburban development. And that's basically, when I look at the drawings and look at the site again, it is feeling more suburban than more rural. Elements that you've presented with the fence and the walkways and setbacks do add to having more rural, pastoral feel to it, and certainly a lot of the green elements in it too definitely help, and being courteous to Creekside as well. So that was sort of my parting feelings, like what would be the minimum number? And again, Mr. Lassiter brought out too, this 22, and you married, to try and get reduction on the east and the west side, I think would give us something to support.
Ken?
I concur with what's been said. I mean, I think that as this is proposed, it will very much change the feel of the corridor that comes into Franklin and that approach.
Okay. Josh?
I don't have anything further to add.
Okay, and I don't have anything to add to what has been said. I think the main thing is that, as our guidelines said, this would not provide an uncongested gateway into downtown. And that, I can go through and pick at different pieces of this, but bottom line, that's it. And I think the mass that you're talking about and the view shed, whether it's from Franklin Road or whether it's from Mac Hatcher, east or westbound, you're going to see this project. So that's those are my thoughts. So Any other comments from the commission? Otherwise, Amanda, do you have any other parting comments?
I do not, unless the applicant has any closing comments or questions.
Gary or Christian, do you have any other comments? Have we been clear?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know the answer to it, but obviously we are going in for a PD request with this development plan. It seems like some of the commentary was that any sort of rezone would be off the table, or are there things that we can provide that it would be contextually appropriate that still come through as a PD request? Are those still amenable to this board?
I mean, I will say this from my perspective, based on what I have heard today and what I have seen on site and what I've just read through our guidelines, I think the current zoning is clear on what's permitted for these two pieces of property. So
Okay.
that would be my suggestion.
Mr. Dial, I think based on what I've heard from the Design Review Committee today, I would recommend, if you are to continue to move forward, that you render something that meets the recommendations that have been outlined to you with the 125-foot lots or something comparable to that, just so that the committee and staff can see the form of the buildings that you're proposing. As I mentioned, right now, we don't have forms that match all the lot widths that you proposed, so it's sort of hard to give those recommendations. But if you were to provide that, it would give the committee a sense of what could be accommodated on the lot, whether it meets the current zoning or not, that has the lot widths and produces the lot forms that are anticipated and encouraged for this corridor. That maybe that is larger than what ER suggests.
But I
so
think
we
we're
don't know.
strongly saying that we're not too amenable to the number of buildings that we see on the plan as present.
And
And it would have to be reduced to more in line with what the current zoning permits.
Okay.
And I do
think
think,
that's
I do
you know,
think what I'm
that's what
saying
I've
would get
heard.
us closer to that, certainly.
Yes. Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank
Gary?
you. I don't have any other questions. I just thank you for your time, and Merry Christmas to everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
you
Merry
all.
Christmas to you. Thank you,
Merry
Christian.
Christmas.
Thank you.
See ya.
Okay. The next one is discussion of alteration solar installation at 103 Everbright Avenue.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to open, we have an applicant today who has submitted for a building permit to install solar installations on the roof, the rear-facing roof sections of the property at 103 Everbright Avenue. We did ask that the building permit be postponed until it comes through historic zoning for approval, and the applicant did opt to come to the DRC to get some preliminary feedback. So I'll turn it over to the applicant, and then Victoria will share staff's comments. Thanks.
Good. This is a new one for us.
Actually, there are
Oh.
panels at the factory.
That's before my time then.
A lot of solar installations, it's very
Yeah.
There are panels at the White Building too, aren't there?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
Okay, excuse us.
Sounds like we made a decision. Yeah, so, hi, my name's Jeremy Curtis. I'm with Solar Titan USA. As you guys know, we're here to get you guys to approve on the LaHue property there at 103 Everbright. So, as Amanda said, on these panels, optimally the way the house lies there on Columbia Avenue and Everbright, the most production where we like to install is to the south side, southeastern. So the rear of the house is where we're looking to install that. So you wouldn't be able to see it there from Everbright. And along the property, it's very, there's heavy landscape and trees along Columbia Avenue as well. They're shading it from the street view.
Okay. Victoria?
Yes, so the guidelines recommend that panels be positioned behind existing architectural features to limit visibility, which, as the applicant has explained, they are meeting those guidelines. And they have also indicated that the panels can be ordered in black in order to better match the color of the roof, with which the guidelines also would recommend.
Okay. Questions from the,
So
Commission?
everything is below the ridge line? Is that what I'm saying?
Correct, sir. There's 18-inch setback, so we'll be below the ridge line and within the envelope of the actual structure of the roof. Similar to pretty much what you're seeing there. There'll be nothing protruding over the ridge line or over a gutter or over an eave of a roof.
If you would like, I can pull up the street view so you can get a better sense of the house.
okay, that'd be good.
See, Amanda, when you do that, can we see the Columbia Avenue sign as well?
Absolutely. Give me just a moment.
Sure.
And while you're doing that, could I ask a question? Like,
Yeah.
how high do they project off the roof?
The minimum code that we need is 3 inches between the bottom of the panel and the roof. So about 4 to 4.5 max off the roof is what you would see. They've got a very low profile.
Okay.
When we get done looking at the Columbia Avenue picture there, if we go back to the front page of the plans I provided, you can kind of get an illustration of what is presented and what the finished product will look like.
So Victoria, do you mind pointing out where these would be?
They would be located on the other side
Yeah.
of that ridge there.
Can you run it around Columbia, though?
Absolutely.
It's well screened.
Yeah, about the only place, if you get to the next driveway, keep going in there. If you get to the next driveway and kind of look back, you can kind of pick up the chimney of the house, but it's very kind of hard to see from that view right there.
It's very well hidden.
Can you go to the alley, the point of the alley, Amanda?
Now, street view won't allow me to quote-unquote drive down the alley,
Sure.
but this is the view shed. The house is here. So you may be able to see from inside this building if there were, I think this building's finished now. It doesn't look like this
Yeah,
anymore.
it's
but
done now.
If you were in here, you might be able to maybe see the back of this house. But it would be very, very obscured view.
Do the guidelines, Victoria, speak to alley view? Or is it only from the front?
It really
access?
only discusses where it would have high visibility from the street view.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I read the Department of Interior's guidelines for application of solar panels today, and it said on rear and least visible parts of the building. So I do believe this complies with the Department of Interior's guidelines.
Right, and our guidelines say freestanding or detached on-site solar panels should be installed in locations that minimize visibility from the public right-of-way.
Which both would be a public right-of-way.
Do what?
Both would be a public right-of-way. The
alley
would-
too?
Yes, absolutely. I lived in the house catty corner backyards, catty corner behind that on Battle Avenue. But even then, that is, in my view, pretty heavily screened. I think you may be able to see it from that alley.
I think it would be minimal.
I agree with you. I think that the house is well screened on the other sides, but in that rear, if you could peek over that fence, you could, during especially a fall evening or a winter evening, you
Yeah.
could probably pick that up.
Yep.
Okay,
I'd like to add too that the intent of the design guidelines for most alterations to buildings would be that they'd be lesser visible elevations. And while an alley is still a public thoroughfare, it's not to the same degree as a roadway. So you know, you're going to see additions on homes if you're neighbors. You'll see some alterations if you're neighbors. But we feel really strongly, because we did recognize the Secretary of Interior standards and the National Park Service guidance for solar panels when we wrote those for the guidelines that we practice here in the city, that an application like this was actually pretty ideal. We're fortunate that the south-facing is actually on the backside of the house.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're probably going to get a submission at some point, this body will, that will, in order to get the capital, they're going to be in a visible spot, and
The factory at Franklin did have solar installations installed in places that are partially visible, but due to the context of the property being a factory with a metal roof and being able to select solar panel colors and a profile that splatter, we are able to very, very much limit that impact to the character of the building.
And I do think, Mr. Chair, that we went down the road at one time of, is that alley conducive to widening and putting houses on, and it isn't, so.
Right, yeah, we had that discussion.
We did.
Not when I was on this
Yes.
commission, but as an owner of property and the pork
The
chop type
neighborhood,
lots,
yeah.
that type of thing. But I could see there being an instance coming before us in the future where an alley could certainly be, as a public right-of-way, not well enough screened and for some reason not be compatible with this. But, yeah, having lived there, that,
Any other comments on this? Victoria, you got anything else? Do you have anything else, sir?
No, sir, thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we're done.
And just so the applicant is aware, your next step in this process will be to apply for a formal vote with Historic Zoning Commission.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Awesome, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Merry
having me.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
All right, our next one is a discussion of addition and pool deck at 121 Miles Manor Court. Scott Harrop. Hope I pronounced that right.
Very close, Harrop. Yeah, very close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Not at all. Well, thank you all so much for being back in front of you. Remember, we presented last month to you all some additions and renovations for the Cash family. We brought back a pretty heavily modified version of that, but we'd love to discuss it again. Mr. Cash is here to also impart some just neighborhood knowledge and some thoughts that he has as well. We can open up for questions and kind of talk about, my role tonight probably more sort of the facts of the design, size, and nature of where it's going on the home, and then Scott, this is also Scott, and also comment on some of the things that we want to make sure that we heard. Thank you.
Yes, so we moved to our home in 2010.
Did you hit the button on that? Thank you.
There we go.
Perfect.
We moved our home in 2010. We had one daughter, and my wife was pregnant with our second daughter, and now we have 5 girls. So I call my living room the estrogen ocean. But we just love it, you guys. We have adored where we live with all of our hearts. I mean, I think our neighborhood is like this coolest little part of Franklin, and we have just loved it. And so we've processed the idea of, my wife homeschools and I work from home sometimes, and we've just processed a lot the idea of moving. But as I've looked around at other places around Franklin, I just don't want to leave. We love our home, and our kids have spent their whole lives there, so we're just trying to sort of expand it a bit. The square footage really was never a huge issue for us of the house. It's more just the current layout of the home was designed probably with, I think, empty nesters in mind, or a different family than us. And so we're just trying to expand it a bit to accommodate our family so that we could stay there forever, because that's our hope. And we love it. We love it dearly. And so we've spent a lot of time talking to our neighbors. They're very well aware of what we would like to do. Every single one we've spoken to is in favor of doing a renovation. So when we purchased our home in 2010, we bought the home, which is on a 1/4 acre. We bought a 1/4 acre next door, and then our whole neighborhood was platted with 25-foot lots. So we purchased also a 25-foot lot that is behind our home that runs perpendicular to the other lots, if that makes sense. I don't know. So it's actually 7 25-foot lots. So the total is 0.6 acres. And so our hope is to really leave the vast majority of it green, because my girls go out there and dress up in 1800s clothes and play all the time. So we'd love to keep as much of it green as we can. And we're really hoping to have a pretty minimal footprint on the lot as we, hopefully get to proceed with something. But and I've tried hard to dig into the history of the home and to find out, I believe it was built in 1930. We can't locate the original square footage. It's not in any of we've done the Freedom of Information Act. We've just not been able to find the original square footage of it. nor do we know really what happened between 1930 and 2006 when the previous owners did a renovation. So we bought it maybe a year or two. It sat vacant for a couple of years, and we bought it right after that. So our neighbors kind of all know what's going on, and we've mentioned to them would you rather see us add on a little bit of square footage to the current home, or do we want to build from the ground up on the lot that we own next door? Because that lot is 0.3 acres. And so from what my understanding of the guidelines, we could build a home on that lot that really would accommodate our family. But we just don't want to do that. We love our house, and we would much prefer to stay in it. And so Scott can explain kind of what we've amended since our last meeting. I was out of town, unfortunately, with work, so I couldn't be here last time.
Thank you, Scott. So yeah, I don't know if the committee has had a chance to review the document as yet, and Amanda, I'm sure will pull it up to see.
Sorry, I thought I had this on.
No worries, no worries.
But yes, they've seen the document.
Gotcha. So the current square footage under roof or current footprint under roof is about 2,800. It's 2,799 square feet currently. We are adding 733 square feet to that. On the document, you'll see that the gathering room, part of the gathering room kind of absorbs an existing covered porch to enclose that and expand it for living space. And then there's a new porch being added on the pool side that would going to be tucked in the back corner, unseen from really any street perspective. With a corner lot, we kind of have two fronts, but we've really tried to be aware and respectful of maintaining the historic facade, historic nature of what we do think is the primary historic area of the house, and then adding on to the rear, or rather, it's the rear on the Miles Manor Court side. It's still on the front facade of the Mayberry Road side, but a respectful addition that maintains roof lines, keeps things relatively low. It's single-story space. Nothing would be added on the upper level. So it's all just kind of on that main level for the living areas of the home. And then it does expand out into open sort of outdoor room space. The pool area, a little bit of a fire pit spot, outdoor kitchen. And then, of course, as Scott was mentioning, maintaining all the green space that would be it's sort of toward the northwest of the property. So that's the nature of the addition. I mean, it was really quite modified from the previous one. We had I'd say a significant amount of square footage on the last one that we decided to say, okay, what can we do? How can we make this work? What would the committee entertain, and open it up for conversation?
So I'd like to give a little bit of background and clarity to the proposal. The applicant had previously asked for an addition that was pretty sizable in relation to the existing conditions. The existing conditions include an addition that was approved in 2007, probably built the same year, maybe the year after. That addition totaled just over 2,000 square feet. Now, based on the documents that I read, that 2,000 square feet wasn't divided into lower story versus upper story. It was cumulatively right over 2,000 square feet for the addition. Now, most architects are able to look at the manner of construction and kind of get a sense of the original footprint because there is a major difference between modern construction and 1930s construction. I don't know, this may be all drywalled on the inside and it's harder to tell, but because we don't have a certain number for the original, my assumption is the original footprint, being a single story, is still less than the 2,000 square feet that was added. And then, so I wanted to be very fair about it. I did ask Mr. Cash Mr. Harrop, the Scots.
That's right.
If he could provide the main level versus the upper level of the existing conditions so that we can kind of get a sense of what that footprint was that was added to the house. And so he was able to provide that. That footprint was right over 1,000 square feet for, can you refresh my memory? I have it in my email. I thought I wrote it down. But that breakdown is of existing bottom floor versus existing top floor.
Yeah, the existing main level, existing bottom floor, main level under roof is 2,799.
Okay,
And
that's
then-
what that number
yeah,
is.
And then I think up top, and then it's in my documents as well, but it's in my bag back there. I think it's a little over 1,000, about 1,080.
That's
square
right.
feet.
Okay.
And to your point, Amanda, we've tried to figure out that sort of point of delineation. where it is that in the interior of the home. But I think during the 2006 or 2007 timeframe, and there's some definite areas where you can say, okay, yes, this is the old part of the house. It's fairly evident. But then it starts to blur pretty quickly.
Also, my recollection is they kind of ran out of money at the end of the last renovation. So the current drawings that we have of that renovation are not 100% accurate, but I'm guessing for all intents and purposes of what we're talking about, it's pretty accurate. And that would be that left image right there is the current footprint of the home.
Yes, thank you. So what I did want to add is that we did, in good faith, the applicant and staff worked together to try to figure out those numbers for you. And the most we could figure out is that 2,000 square feet has been added to the structure, as I can imagine was fairly original. What you see here is an existing porch the applicant is proposing to remove to add this addition. So this addition's actually larger than 733 square feet. I believe what the applicant did is, took this number, removed it and netted it out. So it was, the cumulative add is 733 square feet. What the guidelines would recommend is that if a portion of a building's removed, it's removed. Then you calculate the square footage that is appropriate to add based on what's existing or historic. In this case, it would be historic because there is a sizable modern addition on it. So the applicant is aware that this is over what the guidelines would recommend, but it is closer to what the guidelines would support than the previous month's discussion item. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Victoria. She can speak a little bit more clearly to the guidelines.
Well, and I also just wanted to add that from the previous DRC meeting, the applicant did respond to some very specific comments. The new proposal keeps more distance between the rear of the building and that 7-foot side yard setback, as well as more distance between the side of the building and the 10-foot front yard setback facing Mayberry Court, which was something that was mentioned previously, and the smaller side addition on Mayberry Court as well. So they have responded to previous DRC comments in multiple ways.
Okay, let's, one of you, if you can, or whoever, excuse me, clarify the square footage that you're talking about adding. I've heard 733 and I've heard 1,000, and what are we adding?
I would ask the applicant to provide that exact number, but the proposed add is a gathering room that appears to be 27.2 by 19.6, and then a screened porch that is 19.4 by 21.6. I did the math earlier, but I did not write it down. I believe it's closer to 900 square feet than it is the 733.
But whether it's 700 or whether it's 900, am I butting that against the 2799 to come up with my 50%?
So that the existing porch is 200-ish. Well, it's currently
Okay.
it's 11 by 22.
So, okay, well then that's gets us back to, that's the 900-ish, so you're netting down.
So the net is
Yeah,
733.
yeah, all right, nets.
So I don't know if, I can clarify that this does not meet the intent of the design guidelines, but I can't tell you what the overage is because we don't know the original square footage of the structure.
Okay.
We do know that 2,000 square feet was added top and bottom in 2007.
And real quickly, based on my sort of review of the upper level plan and kind of trying to identify that point where maybe if there was a little bit of an upper level in the roof system of the original 1930s home to where the spaces that exist today are, it seems to me like it was about 600 square feet upstairs that was added during the course of that 2006, 2007 addition. Now, of course, I have no proof or anything to necessarily say that's the gospel. However, just based on my professional experience in looking at the plan and looking at the house, that appears to be about what it might have been. Because based on where I think that the previous house or the original house might have ended.
I think the original house was about 10,000 square feet, but in 2006 they knocked off a whole bunch of it.
And I'll just go ahead and say really quickly, Ms. Pierce, I apologize. I don't want this to be a tedious process by any means. The numbers help, but the intent of the guideline is that the historic structure be maintained as the prominent structure and that the addition not oversize the historic portion of the building.
And I think that's what they're doing, I think. But
Well-
anyway, we'll see. Mary, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, would it not be on a Sanborn map to tell you what the original footprint was? Because we don't consider the upstairs.
Right,
Yes,
you're
right.
absolutely right.
Right.
And right now, the footprint of the structure is right at 2,800 square feet.
No, ma'am,
But
on the
I
historic,
understand,
yeah.
the Sanborn maps do not exist for
That.
the Miles
okay.
Manor subdivision.
Gotcha.
What about,
But
what about
he
the-
said around 600 square feet was the upstairs of that addition,
But
he
that
thinks.
doesn't really.
I know
yeah.
that, I know that, but if it was a 2,000 square foot addition, just
Mm-hmm.
math will say the bottom was about 1,400 square feet. I'm just
Yeah, that's right.
picking out numbers, so it's,
And what is going to continue to concern me is that this will make us over 100% addition to a historic home, and we have routinely not, I think the largest we ever approved
80-something.
was 80-something. And so in fairness to how the applications have been reviewed, to me, this is hard. I hate it, but I think it's going to be over 100% addition to the historic home.
If the applicant believes that, 600 square feet is what was added upstairs, then to Mr. Roberts' point, the addition at the bottom was about 1,400, which means that, given the existing square footage, that the house has already been doubled in footprint.
right.
Remind me of the year of the addition.
2006 or 7, right around
So has
there.
somebody checked the tax records to see the square footage on the house
Yeah.
prior to
Try to
2006?
check everything.
What did you all find in the tax records?
I didn't find anything that said what the original square footage was as I looked through the tax records.
So, Mr. Denton, to your point, there could be some sort of a bump in between, one year and another, and showing that the home doubled in size or the home increased in size on the tax record. Sometimes the tax records don't break down footprint from upper story square
Sure.
footage. But I did not check the tax record, but I did check our building permitting records to see what was applied for. And unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't any sort of delineation between square footages upper or lower.
Right, and the reason I was asking about the historic tax records is it may have shown what the total square footage was in 2004, to compare it to at least know we had this, and I understand, to give a better ballpark of
Right.
that. But I understand have you talked to the prior owners?
I've not talked to the prior owners. I've tried to get in touch with the builder who did the renovation, but he's not in business any longer.
Have you tried to get in touch with the prior owners and just
No.
not been able to reach them?
No, I have not tried yet.
Okay.
When we purchased the home, I got every bit of information from them that I could, and I have a file this thick, and I read through all of it and couldn't find anything. But I'm
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think, yeah.
So at this point, the applicant is looking for your guidance on whether or not this addition could be supported so that they can continue to move forward on producing elevations. The proposal before you is simply the footprint at this
Well, we're at
time.
the same point we were last month, or last time, basically, right?
I
It's over.
think they just want to hear from everybody to get some very clear direction on whether or not they should continue to move forward on their proposal or think about other options.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to speak first on that. I'd like to say that I always appreciate people that love their home, and I'm glad you do, and that you love being in Franklin. I wouldn't be able to support it if it's that 100% here when other people come before us. But I would make a suggestion. So if you go up and down 3rd Avenue, with some of the homes that front 3rd Avenue, they're large. People have built detached buildings in the back, part of garage, and to get extra living space that are not connected to the house. I don't know, that might be a consideration, since you have so much property, to do some type of, detached, living space building.
Do you think we'd run into similar issues with it? I've talked to some friends who've done those, and it seems like it's been a bit of a complex thing to walk through that. So I'm just curious.
Tell you that a detached building is not subject to the 50% rule in the guidelines.
Well, and I also heard, and maybe I misheard, that part of this is a separate lot.
Yeah.
So,
Actually, what you're seeing, well, other than the pool, nothing touches the secondary lot that we have. So on the right side of that image,
I see.
the entire home is on the 1/4 acre lot.
Okay.
But we have 0.6 acres.
Understood.
So to answer Mr. Cash's question, if you don't mind my speaking to it, and then Mr. Denton's as well, I'll cover that first. Yes, you would need to plat these as one lot if you were to add the pool or to add any additions.
Yeah, we
that
were in
went
the
into
middle of that process, but
Absolutely.
then our surveyor said, hey, don't finish the final plat until you know whether or not you're going to be able to.
That's an excellent
to do anything,
suggestion.
so.
As
So-
far as accessory dwelling units, they are considered individual structures. The zoning ordinances require that they be incidental in the footprint, clearly the height to the principal structures they serve. They can be used as dwelling units. They would just be limited to no more than 50% of the footprint of the structure they serve and have to meet all the applicable design guidelines. So it wouldn't be subject to no more than 50% of the historic house, but it would be subject to being more ancillary in nature.
And Mr. Chair, to me, that would that could be within our guidelines, and I think an approach that could be supported with the historic zoning guidelines.
Scott, I have another question. So this concerns the original footprint. So would you say that the basement, so you have a basement?
Correct.
Would you say the basement is under the complete part of the old house?
No, so it's strange. If I remember correctly, because I met with the builder 2 years after he'd finished it, I believe they raised the house up 18 inches. And then they added basement on, I would say probably 60% of it, and then the rest of it's crawl space. So there's basement and crawl space under the original structure for sure, because you can see the original foundation from our garage, which is down there.
But that doesn't help you differentiate what's old and what's new.
No, unfortunately it doesn't. I mean, it's,
The reason I asked that question, the tax records list the basement at 1,500 square feet.
oh, there's no way. Well, the garage itself is 800 square feet, I believe, including the closets that they put in there. And then the basement itself, I think, is 25 by 17, whatever, with some nooks.
Anything else?
I have a couple questions. So, just so we understand clearly as a family, would the preference be that we, because I'm not, well, two questions. One, is the understanding that we literally could not, according to the guidelines, could not touch the current home at all from a square footage perspective?
Well, unless you can show that the original house, what the size of it is, and if it's larger than we think. I know a family connected with that house that might have some photographs. I don't know if you've checked with Rick Warwick. He's kind of the genius and keeper of historic photographs here. So we believe that you have a 100% addition, but if you could prove that wrong.
What if we can't prove it
but
right,
if
though?
we
I'm
just-
also curious. If
but
there's no
we-
proof that it's,
We've never gone over 80-something%, no matter how large the lot was,
Sure.
no matter whatever. So,
but if we
and
can't,
it's
if we
supposed
can't-
to be
I'm sorry.
50.
If we can't find the original square footage, then what is the benchmark? How does that get calculated?
We can guesstimate the original square footage by looking at an aerial and seeing where the addition was tied to the house. I thought that would be something that the architect would be able to provide. We can certainly work together to try to find some explanation of that, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's very clear to me that the addition's already much larger than the house just by looking at the outside.
Sure, okay. Last question. So would there then be a preference that we would build from the ground up on this lot that we own that's adjacent to our lot? Because it's, like I said, it's 0.3 acres. And my understanding is that we can cover 35% of that with the home. An additional 25% of that could be covered by hardscapes. So, I mean, to be honest, that's the last thing that we want to do, just because we'd rather preserve green space in Franklin and green space for our neighborhood. And our neighbors love coming around that corner and being able to see the original Harlansdale barn and all of that. And if we built a structure, that view would change. You know, we would obviously, I mean, we love historic homes. So if we built a structure, we would do our very best to make it the most historically appealing home we possibly can. But I'm just curious if the preference would be to cover up that much green space, is that what you guys would prefer us to do if we can't? Because unfortunately, with the layout of the current home, I just don't think there's a possible way to reconfigure the interior. We have a really small kitchen, and we have 5 kids. God willing, we'll have a ton of grandkids one day, and we want to live there forever. And so we'd love to have a big kitchen. And there's just really no way to reconfigure to have a bigger kitchen. I mean, we have for 10 years tried to reconfigure in our minds and talk to architects, and even before we met Scott, and have just tried to figure out how to reconfigure that. So it would probably be a deal breaker for us in staying in that home if we could not, do anything to it. And so I'm just asking, would the preference be, yeah, we would build from the ground up next door?
Mr. Cash, before they answer that, I just want to note that, 35% lot coverage is what is the maximum recommended by the design guidelines, certainly. But the hardscape is not an additional 25%. The hardscape would be no more than 60% of the lot.
That's what I meant. So my understanding is that the home and the hardscape cannot cover more than 60% of the lot combined.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can answer that question.
That's what I was going to say. We really can't.
No.
I think what he's asking is there any possible way to add to this house? And if not, then he has his answer as to whether or not he should continue to add to this house.
Well, I think Mr. Laster brought that, and Ms. Pierce talked about that, of adding an additional or an accessory type structure there somehow, some way.
I mean, to
Otherwise,
me, emotionally, it's worse for Franklin for us to build a new home.
we get that.
I guess my reaction is if you have the separate lot, you have whatever rights you have with respect to that lot. We are looking at an application that's before us on a request to do an addition, and we have to follow the guidelines as to what that is. So I hear you, but I think we're bound by what's in front of us on the and it's really, from my perspective, it's your and I'm sympathetic to it. But it's your all's burden to come forward and show to us what you believe the square footage to be, so we can kind of run those calculations. And it sounds like everybody has a pretty good sense of what they are, and maybe that's wrong, but I think you all are going to have to bring that forward to us for us to be able to consider if you think it's different.
I mean, I don't think there's any chance that the original square footage was enough to warrant a difference, where it's a make or break. So
yeah, and
So I mean, I think we can currently guess what it was enough to have an idea. Maybe we're 500 square feet off, which could mean if we could add 200 square feet. I mean, that is another thing we had talked about. Could we add literally just 200 square feet? Because that would get us the ability to expand our kitchen. And so
You're saying enclose the back porch?
Enclose the back porch, add 6 feet to it, because it's currently 12 by 22. Make it 18 by 22. And get rid of the dining room, get rid of the screen porch, and it's literally adding.
I think we just got to see how the numbers work with whatever you come up with, design-wise.
Well, I mean, we know we're going to be in the same situation. The question is the committee going to allow, the family to make that minor of an adjustment to this home?
Well, the design guidelines currently recognize anything under roof as an addition. So, right, you're proposing right now would be, an enclosed addition and then a porch addition.
No.
But what you're proposing is to enclose an existing porch, which would be within the existing footprint of the house.
Yeah.
So staff could support that if the design was meeting all the other guidelines.
We proposed to extend that porch is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Just to extend it 6 feet so we could get.
Right, back at the same question, I think.
Well, I think we are, so
Okay.
I don't know what else to say at this stage.
I think on that lot that you're at your square footage that's achievable without doing an accessory structure. I mean, is that clear?
Okay. That's sad. That's really sad.
Back to the drawing board. All right, thank you.
all.
Excuse me, I can show you a friend's, I bet he would let me show you, a friend's house that did his kitchen in the basement, and it's amazing.
Okay.
Hunter.
No.
That's where they used to put them.
All right, next item, discussion of demolition canopy alterations and additions at 117 Lewisburg Avenue. Kevin Coffey. Amanda?
As a reminder, this application was discussed at the Design Review Committee at the last meeting by an associate of Mr. Coffey. The DRC gave some feedback that the design was a little unclear in determining where the addition met the existing structure and how the addition was to be differentiated from the existing structure so as to read as an addition and not purely an extrusion of the existing. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Coffey so he can cover those points.
And I will attempt to do so. I'm Kevin Coffey.
Hit your button on your mic there, Kevin.
Oh,
Thank
I was
you.
already on.
Thank you.
Is that it? Okay.
Let's wait just a minute.
Okay, let me.
I'm sorry about that, Mr. Coffey. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. All right, so I think I reviewed the last meeting, and unfortunately I was out of town. And I think hopefully the items we addressed in this submission will help clarify a couple of the items that were out there before. So I added a few documents. There was one issue I included in that narrative. I think everything in red is hopefully the new part in the narrative. But one thing I don't think we even talked about before is there's a existing pergola structure in the backyard that's basically gone now in our proposal. So unfortunately, in all the pictures of the back, the pergola kind of blocks everything off of what we're trying to see without getting to an aerial or something, but that just kind of is what it is. So the first diagram, I think there was a question as to the square footage, and I think some people were questioning my calculations, which I can't believe. But anyway, this should hopefully clarify it. So we did include in the number the addition to the back right that we believe was done in the 50s. And we don't have definitive proof of that. But it has been remodeled on the inside since then, but nothing was done on the exterior. And I felt like, given precedence of projects I had done before, that it was basically a historic addition at this point. And so I counted that in the original number, and that's the 3038. So that number also counts the covered porches, which again, in precedent, we've always counted those. So the one thing it does not count is there was a porch addition put on the back in the last iteration when the accessory structure was built. And so we're proposing that that's gone. But I did not count that covered square footage in the number. So it's backed out already. And then the main addition behind the house, which is the partial kitchen, living room, mudroom, laundry, that's the 1,090. And then the small closet addition to the right is the 137. So 1227 total, 40%. So in my view, well under the guideline number. However, I will say this, that if we did not count the 1950s edition in the back and the number comes out to be adding about 61%, which would be over the guideline number, but still inside numbers that we've been allowed before, given certain situations.
So Kevin, I'm going to go to the photographs you provided, so you can explain a little bit why you believe this is the 1950s edition. And I'll go ahead and state for the record that the Sanborn maps do not show this area, but the last Sanborn map update was 1950, I believe. And I don't know that this area is particularly well shown on that map either.
This lot is not shown, to my knowledge, on any Sanborn map.
Lewisburg
And
area is
interestingly,
rough on Sanborn's.
Mr. Sims' property right here is the last one that's shown on it. And even though this one's closer to town,
It
for
is
some
very
reason,
odd because of the angle of
not
the street.
shown.
But it's very common in the 50s and 60s that additions were done in a very flat-roofed manner. So this, to me, speaks as a 50s, 60s addition, certainly, which would fall into being over 50 years in age.
I do believe that the really wonky rafter tails that were added to it, which I am amused by in an architectural kind of way, because it's got a flat roof, it would not have rafter tails at an angle. I think maybe the last contractor that did the additions added those. So they aren't really an indication necessarily of it being older. But I think we have anecdotal evidence that, that it was done in the 50s originally. And the Starks had redone the bathroom at some point to make it more fun. It was another bedroom, I believe, is that correct? There was another bedroom back there at one time. So at least the footprint, the way it's shown right now, was done in the 50s. You know, irrespective of quality of the addition, I do still believe that it counts, in my view, and of course that benefits us, but as a historic addition. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Absolutely, we're not changing it at all.
Ms. Rose, before you leave that, can you point out the addition? I'm kind of lost at this point. So that part.
That flat roof piece off of the back. So,
On the top row is the front. This is the left elevation, as in the front being on the where my cursor is. This is a partial left elevation as you turn the corner to the back of the house. So you can see this is that pergola, and you can kind of see that flat roofed addition peeking through here. Here it is fully exposed with that pergola to the side of it. And then
And
going to
that's what
these
shows the
photos,
added
it's a little
porches.
closer up. So you can see the hexagonal piece here.
so the pergola obviously obscures that hexagonal piece right now, but unfortunately, when they did the 50s edition, it was a very folk kind of addition, and the window on one side of that hexagonal piece looks right back into a wall and right back to another window. It's not something that anybody would do architecturally, so it was obviously just done from need at the time. And that kind of is another reason why I think that it's probably vintage 50s, is that too much after that, I think there would have been a little more codes and, if not zoning, probably not zoning, but codes intervention and something like that. So that's one reason why I think it's kind of an older, more folk kind of addition to the house. And then you can see that bottom left photo looking up is that hexagonal piece. I guess at no time was there ever a window in the back of it. There's a lot of Victorian houses that don't have the window on the furniture side and just have them on the diagonal, but the window on the one side's pretty much rendered useless from the inside especially. So that was the first clarification, was really that lot square footage situation. And then the next clarification was, I tried to overlay, and hopefully you'll be able to see the lines, the site plan. So I took the diagonal sight lines from the adjacent houses, and I went back and did pretty much every historic zoning guideline I've ever dealt with has this as their main requirement. And yours does as well. It's just one that kind of gets passed over initially as one of the guidelines. If you take the sight lines from the adjacent houses and project them, that the entire addition fits to where you can't see it from any point on the street. So the lone exception to that on our project is the small addition, that's the closet. And we feel like that's well back from the front of the house, and it also kind of mirrors a projection on the house next door. So I believe as long as we're in setbacks, which we plan to be, that's a legitimate place for a very low-key addition, which is what we're planning over there. That'll just make the house much more functional. So really, the entire addition that we're proposing is 100% out of view from everywhere except the backyard and the side yard. One other thing that site plan shows that kind of reinforces that we may not have talked about yesterday is there is a fairly extensive landscape development in the back, and this addition is really reinforcing the access to that really well-done landscape development that they have in the backyard, and something that we really want to accentuate. So to me, the extension really helps kind of pull the whole idea together in a way that's not really there now, which is the pergola. So I just want to remind you that that's like one of the key dictates of historic zoning, is not being able to see it from the street, and that's really what we're trying to achieve here. So I think the other main point that was brought up the last time had to do with how are we differentiating the new additions from the old part of the house. So there's a couple of ways that we're going to do that. So whether we do the hexagonal extension, or I had an alternate that's squared off, the detailing will be totally different, compatible but different. No rafter tails, because to me the rafter tails really just signify the original house. Because we want something well detailed, but we just want to do a flat soffit and a regular fascia on those. Really, I think that in itself will show the addition from the main part of the house. The other is we have a couple of flat roof areas that we're planning, and we're going to drop those below the eave of the existing. And then the other way we're going to do is the entire main roof form of the house is staying exactly the way it is. You know, from the front, you're not going to see it at all, but even on the back, I think just the sheer form from left to right of that main gable, and then the really quirky collection of dormers, which I have no idea how those came about, whether they were all done at the same time and they just were all different sizes, or what the deal was, but we aren't modifying those dormers at all. And we're doing our additions to, in fact, to try to miss those and keep those where they are. We are proposing to overlap them just slightly with the gable on the back that is only high enough for us to get a new stair into the upper level that meets code, and is a much less dangerous stair than the one they have now. So I think hopefully those kind of answer the main questions you had. I wanted to point out as well that in the last process on this house, which I was not involved in, but I heard that the back left corner of the house there was some importance in, I guess it was an enclosed porch when they put a kitchen there, and there's kind of a lattice
Yeah, I
treatment on
remember, I
that.
remember that.
I think that was prescribed by the last meeting, so we kept that. We're not impinging on that. We are gonna overlap it just slightly with a new basement stair access, but that whole lattice corner should show where the old porch was, and we're not touching that either. I didn't know how important that was. One small point on the left side, we're wanting to close in a window just for the function of the room, but we plan to show that as the shutters being closed on the window as opposed to being open like they are now. That's that left elevation. But again, left side, it's not one that you can see it, but you'd have to really be looking for it to find that detail. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. Hopefully I covered most of the items there.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Amanda?
Well, thank you very much for clarifying that. And I can state for my recollection that the trellis was requested because it was an enclosure of a porch that was not, it was underneath the roof line, and the applicant did not want any fenestration. So it was a way to try to allow one to see that it was an enclosed porch as opposed to just having always been actual enclosed space. So that was the intent of that there. It was the means by which that was selected. It could have been windows. It just wasn't the intent of the, or the desire of the applicant to do windows. Now, as for the remainder, I do agree that this addition, albeit an odd-shaped addition, was done, it's likely to be over 50 years in age. And so for staff's calculations, it would be considered part of the quote-unquote historic structure of the house. The addition is all to the rear. It is fairly mindful of the form that we do have. The one concern I do have, and I admittedly am a bit torn about it, is extruding this this hexagonal roof form outward. The design guidelines would recommend maintaining architectural features. This is a unique architectural feature to this house, and it's a historic wood. The applicant would like to keep that form but pull it out. I do think that takes a little bit away from the original form, but it is entirely on the rear. So I'd like to show the second option that the applicant mentioned. So this is the second option. This is the alternative, which squares it off. Now, it still covers that up, I believe. Is that correct, Kevin?
It does. It just makes sense back there where I'm adding it to continue that roof line. It does less damage to the main structure. You're going to be adding on to the back no matter what to get these additions, and it's a very logical place to land in. So, I had originally done it more like it was an homage to the original structure. I was obviously going to change the detailing and the window fenestration and things like that, so there was no mistake that it was original. But it just seems like a really logical spot to land back in without dealing with any of the other roof forms. And I really feel like since the plan over time had really made that space and that form kind of moot, that we're really not causing major damage to the original structure by doing that. And we do intend to keep on the interior, and I know you guys don't focus on that, but we do intend to keep the space that's above it and all the rafters and everything else. If somebody wanted to look in the attic space and see that stuff was there, they would be able to do it.
So with that said, it doesn't entirely meet the intent of all the guidelines that would apply, but if the applicant were to try to salvage the windows, for instance, and reuse the windows that are currently on the back of this hexagon and put them here, I think that would be a really nice homage to the original structure and would show some some of the original historic fabric. But as far as, the traditional main guidelines we look at for additions, the placement is appropriate. You do see some of this closet addition, but I do think that it's behind the main form of the house, and it's attached to what would be a historic, but addition all the same at the rear with minimal visibility, if any, from the street view. That the roof line is, with the exception of the hexagonal portion, which I already spoke to, is appropriate. This is a unique situation for the roof line to come up, but it is to address that stair, and I think that they're doing something that is not going to disturb those dormers that are placed there. So it appears to meet all the main guidelines, with the exception of the architectural feature, which is mostly in keeping with the guidelines. The guidelines do not recommend obscuring original windows. In the past, the commission has considered doing that if they are not highly visible from the street view, and they're done in a way that it's clear that there was a window there at some point, which I think is what Mr. Coffey is intending to do with the closed shutters. I do think providing some photographs to kind of show how you might or might not see that from the street would be helpful for the commission and staff when they're making that determination.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, comments?
I have one.
Go ahead, Kathy.
So the addition is considered to be like 40% coverage?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the two additions together are 40% coverage. And I've already backed out the porch that we're removing. I'm not counting that
All
originally,
right,
so.
okay.
So we're
that's not part of the
40%
equation.
lot coverage. That's what you're saying.
40% of the
Addition.
house. We're adding 40% to the footprint.
Okay.
40% to the addition. The lot coverage is not even
Yeah,
a
not relevant.
consideration
Okay.
on this
Okay.
project.
Huge.
It's a very large lot.
And the 40% counts the 1950s addition, or does not?
No, it does
count?
not.
Does not, okay, that's good.
So do we know what that square footage is for the 50, roughly? The 50s addition?
Well, I do know this, if I did not count it, and I counted it as part of my addition, it would be 62%. I think
62%?
61 or 62%.
Okay.
Somewhere in that
Let's just
neighborhood.
know what that is when you come for the
Okay.
meeting, voting
You
meeting.
mentioned it.
Any other comments?
I do have a question on the shuttered window.
Mm-hmm.
Do you intend to keep the window and just shutter it, or to remove it?
No, we've done a modification in there. That right now, that's a breakfast room and part of the kitchen. And we're making that into a bedroom because we're relocating the kitchen. We need a bed wall. And that presents a wall for a better bed wall, frankly. So the idea would be to keep the frame and everything in there, but not the window itself. We want to waterproof it, but then have it present as the shutters being closed. Historic shutters, tiebacks, hinges, all of that stuff. Same trim.
Well, an idea, could you simply fur out the wall a little bit to accommodate the original window, so it's never seen, you have a solid wall to put up whatever furniture you have, and it preserves the old window, so in the future, if somebody wants to open it up, it's there.
I could, I guess. I'm not sure what that would accomplish,
In our
but
guidelines, just say not to remove.
I do respect that. I mean, that's why I kind of came up with the scenario that I did. But the other thing that happens is that houses like this get modified over time all the time. And I've discovered old windows that have been closed in on other projects and put windows back in. It's kind of more the process over time. That was my way of helping it. Because these plans have to live in these historic houses. They have to be able to be somewhat current.
And
So,
to my point, you just
Yeah.
made, you said you recovered them, went back, so, I mean,
well, I mean, the actual window wasn't in them. It was just the frame, you know.
and next thing is that what Ms. Rose suggested about with the extruded part, taking the original windows and letting that be part of your new addition, I think I prefer that suggestion.
I personally disagree. There's two reasons for it. Is I think then we're getting back into the territory of like we're trying to copy the original piece in a place where it's not. I was really more continuing the form because the form made sense for the room and the way it tied into the main roof. And really, if you're in the house, the one thing that they're missing in the house is any relationship to the backyard whatsoever. It was never intended to have originally that relationship, but that is a relationship that we crave now. So to me, it's a totally legitimate idea to open up the back and make that a glass room. And I just don't think those openings will match that idea. That's my personal opinion. And I feel like the owner's idea is to make that very much a glass room back there.
Okay, any other comments? Lisa?
I think you've accomplished this balance between making the addition different but compatible. And I agree with you that the glassed-in portion accomplishes that. I did have a question regarding the 1950s addition. Is that something that we include in the calculation of
So the design guidelines recommend that one only add up to 50% to his original footprint of a building. And the way we define original to be respectful of the fact that we are managing growth and change over time, not freezing things in time, is that if an addition is at least 50 years in age, and that number is not subjective, that number is used from the federal government's basis by which something may be considered historic in age. If it's at least 50 years in age, then we consider that part of the original footprint by which one can make a calculation. So to Mr. Coffey's point, he's saying that if that addition is considered historic, then he's adding 40% as proposed today. If it's the commission's determination that it's not historic, then he is proposing to add 61 to 62% to what's there today. Or counting that.
And it is an extraordinarily large lot.
It very much is.
And Mr. Chair, just to ask the staff, based on what you've seen, do you believe that addition, whether it's 50s or 60s, or is predating 1972?
This is entirely my opinion, but without having seen the inside. But it was very commonplace in mid-century to have these additions that are flat. And with this house that has a kind of complex roof line, I could imagine they were having a difficult time figuring out how to add to it in the first place. But I do think for all intents and purposes, this addition has some age to it.
I think we have anecdotal evidence from is it the Billingsleys that live
Yeah,
there?
Billingtons.
It made sense with the family that lived there that would be around the age of the addition. Miss Harry Lee always told me that house, when they bought it, was completely covered in a fake brick siding material.
Oh,
Wow.
We could go back to that if you guys want. We could paint it.
You'd love to be a part of that, Kevin.
If it is helpful to the commission, we could ask the applicant to just provide a brief narrative to expound on why he believes that this addition meets that threshold, and have that as part of our application materials, so that in the future, if this is approved by the commission, that's something that we can reference as to part of the reason that it was included.
I just think in light of other applications and questions about age and amount of square footage of additions, that it's helpful to at least, because I just think that's helpful to have that context.
And I would agree.
Some color.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, anything else?
I thought I saw, excuse me, this is my last question. Is there a new chimney back there?
In the addition, there is.
There is?
Yeah, there's a fireplace in the new living room.
Okay. And the
And-
chimney is not visible, or it's
Not
really-
from the front of the house. The way the roof steps down to meet code, you would never see the chimney from the front of the house.
But you'll show us an elevation of it when
Absolutely.
you come back.
Absolutely. And I just noticed that when I was in here that we had put a block from our block library up there, and it's not really the chimney cap that I would ever use on this one, so we'll replace that before we.
Susan, your question?
Yeah.
My concern is the hexagonal portion at the back that you're going to take off, and I'm struggling with that, quite frankly. So it just seems to me that even if it was an addition, that it would be part of the part of the history of the house, and it bothers me that that's going to go away. So that's just my concern.
Yeah, I think, we went through several iterations, and at some point, when you're trying to make everything flow on the inside, you're like, okay, this is what we need to do, is continue this where it doesn't mess with anything else. And really, we even thought about, do we do another flat roof back there over the whole thing, but get a 12-foot ceiling in there, and it looks janky, kind of like the previous addition did. And then the one other thing is, do we isolate that room and just do a roof over that portion and then link it with a flat piece? And I think we've all seen those houses from the back. O'More was kind of like that. They had the flat roof and then another addition
Right.
that stuck up, and they never quite look like they work, So I understand the idea behind it, but I do think that it's just a really logical place to tie into the house and do less damage to the main structure. The other thing that makes me feel less bad about it is that form where you can really see it exists on the front of the house and actually does function as a room that you see out each side of it, the full hexagon. And to me, that's the piece to me that's like really historic and really holds together. So, yeah, I understand, but when we're trying to put the whole thing together, that's just kind of where I feel like we need to interface into the main house.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll say, from my analysis of it, that was one of the considerations I made as well, is that if it were completely removing the architectural feature from this home, which is very unique to this street, has a lot of elements to it that other homes don't, I would be very concerned. And if that hexagonal piece was on the side of the house where it had some visibility, then I certainly would recommend against any alteration to that roof line. But because this is entirely on the back, I do have reservations about it, as I know Mr. Coffey does as well, but ultimately, it presents no visibility. So I do think that it doesn't meet the guidelines 100%, but I think it mostly does. And I can understand why the applicant's proposing to do that. I do continue with any project to encourage the reuse of historic windows. I know that falsifying history is not our goal by any means, but we also want to keep as many historic windows in play as possible. So if there was some place to use those historic windows anywhere on the back where they would be altered, I think that would be fine.
Maybe we can do that. I would say as well that I believe as we've gone through the process, the Starks are actually leaning to the idea that they may like the rectangular room on the back better than the hexagonal one. So I wanted to bring that up to see if that, if you had any more reservations about that idea. And there's a couple ways, I don't necessarily have it drawn, that could be a gable that came all the way out over that, or it could be a hip roof. I have it drawn as a hip. I just felt the hip was a little less assuming, but the language of the main house is really more gables. at the ends and the hips being just in those bays. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that. I don't want to take up too much time, but,
I think it would be helpful if we just saw some more elevations of it.
of
I mean,
the-
if you're not mirror imaging
Here's the alternate rear.
the hex anyway, it doesn't do us any justice to even deal with it. Flat's fine.
That would be my thought. Another thought I would have is if you all could take really good photographs of this house before the addition goes on and share them with Rick Warwick, so they go in his catalog
Oh, okay.
of
Yeah.
what the house was like.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Is there a preference to what you see on the screen versus the hexagonal?
I don't have one.
Bottom,
Me too.
What's that?
the flat,
Because you're just,
the big windows.
You like the squared off, the rectangular version better? Well, I think the Starks will probably agree with you then.
Okay. Kevin, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Merry
Kevin.
Christmas, you guys.
All right, Merry Christmas to you. Good to see you back.
Well, thank you.
Okay, we're on item 5 now, overview of the key changes proposed for the Historic District Design Guidelines.
So I don't want to take too much of your time, but if anyone would like a short break, we would be happy to accommodate that.
That would be good.
that would be good.
Okay, so
Do we need to motion that then?
yes, I've been informed we need a vote for
All right,
that.
then need a motion to take a 5-minute break.
So moved.
Thank you.
Okay,
Ken and-
so
Ken and
for
Brian.
for those watching, we'll return at 5:55
Correct.
PM.
Kelly just, it's all up to January, historic zoning, and the new guy will take over on PRC.
Okay, we're back in session.
No, it's okay.
All right. Amanda, key changes on the proposed historic district design guidelines.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this to you this evening. Some of this you've already heard, but I wanted to give more specific information on the guideline, the actual guidelines that are proposed to change and get your feedback on that. Right now, we are on the calendar here is December 20th. Oh, I am not sharing my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the anticipated timeline here, as you can see, is that we're meeting today. The staff will be meeting with our various stakeholders groups, specifically Downtown Franklin Association, Downtown Neighborhood Association, sometime in January. We are hosting a neighborhood meeting virtually on on January the 19th at 6 p.m. That is a Wednesday at 6 p.m. We'll have more information available on how to access that via Zoom as the meeting approaches, but essentially we'll be going over a lot of what you're seeing today, very high level, and seeking feedback from our neighbors and from any interested parties. We have been having open office hours for citizens to come in and ask questions. We've done 4 times so far. We are proposing 2 full days, January 20th and 21st, which will follow that neighborhood meeting. In case anyone wants to drop in, we'll be in the training room 8 to 5 those days, so you can be guaranteed to have someone to speak to ask those questions. The intent, if you're able to accommodate it, is that we'd like to have a special DRC meeting to review the public input from the neighborhood meetings, from the stakeholder meetings on January 31st. So I'll be sending you a calendar invite, see if that's something that you're able to accommodate. That would likely be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That is a Monday, I believe. And Kelly will confirm it for us. If it's needed, based on your feedback, we could have another special DRC meeting to discuss the public draft again. This is just a placeholder in the case that you feel that it's something that you want to hold after having heard the neighborhood comments. We are anticipating the final draft release on March the 4th. I'm very excited about that. And then as part of the final draft release, we will take this to the DRC again to present, get comments, and then seek a formal recommendation from the Historic Zoning Commission on that draft at its April meeting, and then work toward taking that to Board of Mayor and Aldermen through that process. It's a 1 reading and a work session. So if all goes well, all goes to plan, the approval date would be January 24th, and I believe we would have this effective for, and I'll have to check on that to see if it is effective in time for the June submittals. If not, it would be effective for July. Any questions about the anticipated timeline?
Didn't you have something you sent out earlier where you were trying to schedule individual meetings with us?
Yes, that is something.
Which I think is really a good idea, the way to handle
Absolutely.
that,
So my calendar, actually, if I had that up, I would show you that the very first thing I have on my calendar for tomorrow morning is to begin scheduling individual meetings with you, because it was following this discussion right here. So
Okay.
I'll be reaching out to you. I'd like to try to meet with you all sometime after the holidays in the month of January. Whether it's 15 minutes to an hour, whatever you feel like you want to do. I can meet you in person, or I'll call, or virtually, just to talk through any questions you may have about the guidelines, or any concerns or positive feedback you'd like to share. I want to make sure that, because you're the ones using this document pretty consistently with staff, that it's clear. It provides ample direction for our citizens and the sign professionals that serve them.
Will there be 3 readings?
There will be 1 reading by BOMA.
1 reading, and it will go into effect after that, not in January of 2023.
It would go in effect either in time for the June Historic Zoning Commission, like COA applications, or for the July. I've got to check on that timing. But the intent is that it would go in effect almost immediately. So it may be that night it goes into effect, or it may be that it goes into effect effective mid-June. So the key changes, going back to our objectives, were to address the framework, which admittedly needed a lot of work. We did spend some time with the DRC talking about different types of frameworks we could pursue, and landed on the one that we have, I'll go over briefly, to address graphics, whether it's photographs or digital renderings that can really help illustrate the intent of the guidelines. Ease of use, to make sure that our terminology between all our policy documents is consistent, and to update specific guidelines. So the chapters that we have to address a better framework is that you're listed here. We do feel that these chapters will have more, headings will have more meaning to folks as they're picking up the document to try to see how to address whatever proposal they have. Civic buildings is the only chapter that's specifically new. Some chapters are created using guidelines we already have and just repackaged, but civic buildings is something we've needed very clearly, because right now we have residential and non-residential. But as you know, churches, park buildings, they don't all fit neatly into guidelines that apply to more urban Main Street forms. Any questions about the framework?
Oh, those are some good add-ons, like the site and the setting. That's a good idea.
Well, thank you. I think that it'll be a lot easier for people to find what they're looking for. Some of the headings right now are in alphabetical order, whether it's in residential or commercial, and it's not always very intuitive. So this will help people find what they're looking for. You don't have to look at every heading to decide if what you want to do even applies to the guidelines. You can go to a chapter and see very clearly. So for example, this is chapter 3, commercial buildings. Within the chapters, we've tried to divide it very clearly so people can know where to find information based on their proposal. So if you want to, for say, alter an existing historic building by changing the windows, then you would go to historic commercial buildings. If you want to add square footage, you would go to additions to historic commercial buildings. If you're working with a building that's not historic at all, it happens to be in the historic district, you go to this third section, non-historic commercial buildings, and if it's infill, you'd be the bottom section. So the guidelines aren't all grouped together. Sometimes we find that we focus so much on guidelines to preserve that sometimes the guidelines to help direct alterations or guidelines to address non-historic buildings kind of get lost in there or don't exist very clearly. I wanted to show you signs. I'm particularly proud of this signs section. Kelly is probably the person that took the lead on this chapter, but essentially we have 2 or 3 pages on signs right now, and it's just not as intuitive as it could be. So we've divided it into signs for buildings that are, of a commercial context. They were built to serve as commercial uses. They have a commercial appearance. Signs for buildings that may have a commercial use now, but they were built as residential buildings. We believe that the scale of those buildings dictate different design standards. Signs for civic buildings. Sometimes civic buildings have larger lots and a larger massing and maybe need to afford bigger signs, whereas these other two don't. Guidance for residential infill neighborhoods. We do have a lot of infill neighborhoods we've looked at. People have asked for signage, and sometimes what works for businesses doesn't work so well for those. And then, just guidelines that would apply to all, whether it's color and material, things of that nature, would be in the general section.
Nice.
And then, does that include how the zoning ordinance impacts the sign submittals, or?
That's a great question. We toyed a lot with how to ensure that because both documents are so important in determining the appropriateness of a sign, how best to address that. So what we opted to do is to pull everything that would apply from the zoning ordinance on these specific sign types that we do approve in the historic districts into this document and make it very clear. So what the intent is that if you're in the historic district, you're asking for a sign, you can find all the guidance you need in this one document.
Great.
There are signs that the historic district allows that the rest of the city doesn't, and vice versa. There are things that we don't approve that the rest of the city might consider appropriate. That's more of a suburban type sign. So we make sure that's very clear in here. I wanted to show you examples of the graphical style that we've chosen. So in order to help address different sign types, we have opted to illustrate it in this way.
Good.
There would be a legend, of course, that corresponds as well. But this is a way to show people what the sign types are. So they read canopy sign, they'll know what we mean by canopy sign, and number 7 will list that and will say exactly what the recommendations are for that type of sign. We also wanted to illustrate some of the common guidelines that come forward. This is an illustration that shows how to determine what is recommended for an addition to a building. So, for example, you can see that this is the addition, and that it's limited to no more than 50% of the historic footprint. The historic building footprint is here. 50% of that is here. That porches and roof-covered areas do count toward that. But if you are removing a portion of a building, that cannot be counted toward a new addition.
This is all very, these illustrations are very user-friendly and hopefully will result in you all having to spend less time explaining things to applicants and help the applications be even better.
Thank you. We think so too. My goal in this whole process is to make this where someone can feel very confident, picking up the phone and calling me and saying, I think this is what I can do. Can you talk me through it and tell me how to get through this process? Sometimes I think that, to your point, Mr. Denton, there's a lot of explanation on what specific guidelines mean. So just illustrating those a little more clearly can go a long way.
Did we, just because I'm afraid I'll lose this thought, but I read these and I didn't see it, but, at some point when you keep reading, you don't read well. Did we address in here on infill construction signage that we would like a signage package to come in?
Yes, we did.
Thank you.
We did. For infill commercial buildings in particular, that we work to try to, as when the building's being designed, that the signage is where it's being placed is a thought that goes into that.
Good.
So that we don't have oops situations after the fact, certainly. Great question. Here's another example of just how we're trying to be more user-friendly with our graphics. Another question that we have fairly often is, where does the front yard end and the backyard start? Because we do have different guidelines for what is appropriate for a front yard fence versus a backyard fence, whether it's the height or the material, the opacity. Right. So this is meant to very clearly show when you apply front yard guidelines and when you apply rear yard guidelines. So moving on to just general principles, or our guidelines have an introduction that talks about general principles. Our intent was to have an alteration sample, like a graphic that shows where we would prioritize that you put facade alterations. So you can kind of see here that we're saying the front facade is the most important to preserve intact. As you get to the highly visible side elevations, that those need to be preserved in the way they are. Lesser visible side facades may be important to preserve, but may have a little bit more flexibility, and the rear would generally be the place where alterations could occur. So to try to make it more clear to folks before they come to the Historic Zoning Commission or speak to staff, where the priority is in historic preservation. I know that seems like a very simple thing, but it certainly can go a long way with someone picking this up for the first time. And while I have it open, just look how easy it is to flip through and how pretty. I'm very proud of it. Yeah. And elsewhere in the introduction, we do have how the guidelines apply, types of projects covered by the guidelines, more information about what a certificate of appropriate is and how to get, your project reviewed and approved, and just explaining how the framework works, and mentioning that there are other documents that may apply, such as the zoning ordinance, Envision Franklin, depending on the type of proposal you have. So moving on, some of the guidelines that we've chosen to address for residential would be to provide more specific guidance on where additions or new construction should go on a lot in relation to buildings around it. Also, we've been very, very clear on providing direction on appropriate scale. We have noticed in the past couple of years, in particular, that we've had a lot of folks who have asked for additions to rear buildings, but the additions have a 1.5-story scale, whether in their house existing is a 1-story building. It may not exceed the ridge line, but it still has a scale incongruency that would give one some belief looking at it that the rear of the house is heavier, has more presence, pulls the eye more than the historic portion of the front. We've also tried to address that with accessory structures. So accessory structures should have a more subservient scale relationship to the principal structures they serve. Dormers receive a lot of questions. We've given a specific graphic to show where dormers should be placed on buildings. We've also provided some specific guidance on side elevations, noting that side elevations are not ideal for additions, but if a rear addition is not feasible, where a side addition should go and how it should relate to the existing form. For example, that it shouldn't exceed a third of the width of the house as you see it from the street. We have also provided graphics that show appropriate and inappropriate placement for additions, for height, for sizing. So here's our dormer graphic. This is for principal structures, but it does show that we are recommending a roof dormer over a wall dormer, that it truly sits on the roof, it's not sitting on the outside wall, that the cheek walls are recessed onto the roof, and that the pitch is comparable, honestly, to that of the house, that the pitch is not so flat that it feels like a half story added onto the house. If you want to see examples of the inappropriate, they're in the residential section. I can definitely pull that up, but that was a recommendation that you guys made, so we certainly wanted to honor that. We also provided some guidance to address additions on larger lots. So the commission has occasionally approved additions that exceed 50% when certain other conditions are met. When the lots are substantial in size, there are substantial side yard setbacks, and the addition's entirely on the back of the house, it meets all the other guidelines as would apply with the exception of the size. So that is written in. I'd love your feedback on that. That would be in the additions section for residential. We've also addressed that height of new buildings on newly created streets should be compatible with the historic building heights on the nearest block face in the historic district as established. So if there are pocket neighborhoods created, that you have a basis by which to review any new height, just liken it to what's immediately adjacent to it in an established historic district. Probably the most impactful, and that I want your feedback on specifically, is we've chosen to remove maximum building coverage from the residential guidelines. Right now, it's recommended that one not exceed 35% roof covered areas on a lot. And I'll explain why. I'm seeing some eyes, but staff has continually tried to differentiate this number from another very important number that's required by the zoning ordinance, and that's called landscape surface area. So landscape surface area is a requirement by the city. It has to be met. And landscape surface area would be the percentage of area that's pervious versus impervious on the lot. So where water can seep into the ground and where water can't seep into the ground. It has to be met. Sometimes people choose to meet it with pervious pavers, which could be consequential, but that's why I want to talk through this with you. Right now, we have the guideline, and then we have the regulation, and it's very confusing to most applicants. They're having a hard time understanding the difference between the two, and explaining it can be complicated. If the landscape surface area is met, that means that most of the time, because we have mostly lots in the residential 4 district, R4, that most of the time, 60% of that lot could be covered with nothing but pervious, whether it's green space, actual grass, or pervious pavers. 40% could be covered with roof, with driveway, with walkways, with pools. So because it's only a 5% difference, we felt that maybe removing that guideline would make it a lot easier for people to understand and follow the direction.
So are you referencing the pervious cover in the
Yes.
zoning?
We would never want to approve something through a certificate of appropriateness process that didn't meet the zoning ordinance, because we want to make sure that it's seamless. They can go get a building permit, and it wouldn't have to come back to historic zoning for any sort of alterations.
Well, I like that because it ties it to the zoning, and it seems less arbitrary. Because it's about stormwater and flood control.
Yes, I think that it would be easier as well. I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks. I know it's a 5% difference, but I want to know if that 5% difference is something that you are concerned about or not. It seems that the commission has approved overages of 35% for a lot of new construction, but maybe not as much for established historic block faces. Maybe that's something we need to talk about. Maybe there is a means by which to differentiate that, but we certainly want to be consistent in our approach and be direct in how we provide that guidance.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to just keep those as different subjects, the landscape requirement, landscape surface requirement versus the 35% that we've been working with for a long time. I mean, again, it's within our purview to remember that these are guidelines, and that we do occasionally go over the 35. But I think the 35 is a good starting point in general. I think if we change it to 40, which is kind of what I'm hearing,
For
then,
most lots, it would be 40. Yes.
yeah, then
They can't go over the 40, though. I understand exactly, like, if you start giving a little bit, then someone might ask for a little bit more and a little bit more, but that certainly can't happen. If you're in a R4 district, you cannot exceed 40% lot coverage. It's a requirement in order to get a permit. There's no permits going out where it exceeds it. But the difference is someone could ask for pervious pavers, and that would decrease the amount of green space potentially on that lot.
And it takes it out of the jurisdiction of this body more to zoning, because you can't get a permit, so.
Right.
But you could put in a lot of hardscape that appears to be hardscape, but they are pervious pavers, correct?
Yes,
That would then
but-
allow that number to
Right, but
alter.
the Historic Zoning Commission does review any sort of alterations to hardscape. So if someone has an existing driveway and they want to widen it, or they want to change the location, that's certainly something you review. You review any new walkways onto properties. So if someone wanted to hardscape their whole front yard, that's not practical and it wouldn't happen. I don't think the zoning ordinance would even allow for that in a lot of ways. And so I've tried to look at every possible negative scenario or a consequential thing to removing this. And I think that the one thing we did come up with is that if someone has a PD, a planned district, we may want to have 35% so that the development would have some sort of sense of how much they could cover. A lot of times when people come in for a rezoning, and I'm not speaking to any project in particular, but you've had some preliminary HCC recommendations come your way, so you can see that they're creating their own lot dimensions, and they're creating their own setbacks and how far buildings are from each other. So because we do know that in the historic district, based on our analysis in the past, that roughly a third of the lot's covered with house and the remainder of the lot is covered with driveways or yard, that we would prescribe that for a planned district that's creating its own zoning and creating its own setbacks. But otherwise, for the established areas, it would be the landscape surface area.
And there are pervious concrete options available that have voids in them that comply with the zoning ordinance.
And Hollywood drives or track drives, some people might know them as, are really historically appropriate. We've had requests for those in the past where it does have some grass strips that break up driveways, things of that nature.
Well, is the last time that I talked with the city about pervious materials, they were saying they failed.
Certain ones do fail. For example, gravel is not considered a pervious material anymore by the city of Franklin. So using a gravel component would not allow for any additional coverage on the lot. But there are a lot of proven paver systems that have been and will continue to be approved as part of that.
And we have seen that failing in floodplain areas.
In floodplain.
Yes, I think that may be where
That's
you're
where I'm talking
thinking of, yes.
Becomes foul and no longer percolates.
Right.
And for floodplain areas, it is important to note that even though the Historic Zoning Commission does have a lot of area that is covered in floodplain, that the zoning ordinance would apply as well. So someone wouldn't, be asking for hardscapes that would not be permissible for a permit. We have specific standards for our floodplain development.
Amanda, I'm curious, why was the number 35 chosen in the guidelines to begin with?
So the original number was 30%, and in 2010, there was an update, and based on analysis by staff at the time, we went through and really clicked on parcel data for lots of lots. I think Kelly even helped me with that at the time, years ago, to analyze how much coverage do we roughly see in our districts. A lot of our coverage varies district to district, but downtown specifically, you see about a third of the lot covered with roof, and the rest is, like I said, either hardscape or green space. When you move to Boyd Mill Avenue, for example, or parts of Lewisburg Avenue, you're going to see a lot more lot ratio than you do the houses. And so one size doesn't fit all greatly. It is a number that we bumped up because we did have considerable complaints with 30%. The commission at the time felt comfortable bumping that up to 35, as did the BOMA. So at this point, it really isn't that the 35 isn't working 100%. I think the commission does have some approvals that it's made over 30%, but definitely under that 40%. But because the 40% is regulatory and the differences in the regulation and the guideline continue to be very confusing to our applicants, it's just one way to try to have this document be more easy to use. But like I said, it's one where I feel very strongly that I want to go the direction of the commission and the neighbors. So
new construction in just residential is 40%. Is that
In,
what you're
in
saying?
R4 districts, which most of ours are.
R4.
But if someone's rezoning a property and it requires a development plan, what these guidelines would recommend for the new would be that any new development plan for residential would have 35% maximum building coverage. But in the established areas, it's just regulated by the zoning ordinance.
Any scenarios where that 35% benefited the board in making a preservation-type decision?
I believe the only times that I can recall right now where the 35% was something that was truly helpful to the commission in being effective is when somebody would ask for an addition to an existing home that didn't meet the addition guidelines or the lot coverage guidelines.
Didn't meet the 50%, but it was way under 35%.
And that's another example. So, you know.
I mean, I remember one on Everbright we did like that. And, I mean, there are others.
Just
I
this
know.
first bullet point alone, in some of those neighborhoods that have substantial lot sizes, the commission might approve a 60% addition because the lot coverage isn't anywhere remotely close to being exceeded.
Right.
So to your point, Brian, it might be that helps the commission determine appropriateness of addition sizes if we were to maintain it. But ultimately, it's something we'll have to think through if we were to maintain it to try to make it easier for the public to understand.
But it's a very rare case.
It is.
Okay.
And
The
it may
reason you could argue, I could argue this either way.
Right.
But the reason you could argue for it is, how's it I'm trying to say it? If you're in the historic overlay, you already have other criteria you have to meet. So that would be one thing that was consistent, that didn't cause you to lose 5% coverage because you were in the overlay.
By
Right.
removing it.
Yes.
Yes, I definitely see that. It's checks and balances where, you know, I felt from conversations from the DRC and frankly from citizens I work with every day, that they would rather see additions that are more appropriately sized to the house and less concern about lot coverage in general, because your side yard setbacks and your front yard setbacks that are regulated by the zoning really help reinforce that that context up and down the street.
I'm going to suggest that each of you think about this item, and as we progress through this process, that we can kind of come to some consensus on it,
Absolutely.
rather than trying to hash it all out tonight for the sake of time
Right.
tonight.
Oh, absolutely. And I certainly would love to hear your thoughts on it with
Yeah,
our
I think
one-on-ones.
it's a good, something good to think about.
And one other to think about, you know, we could start looking at landscape surface area on the plans that you all receive that can help kind of guide you in those situations where there are larger lots and you're
Yes.
looking at additions on the back that could kind of take the place of lot coverage.
Because we haven't dealt with that too much, landscape surface areas. It's just been 35% and the 50%, that's what you try to deal with.
Right, and so what we could offer is to, you know, have that applicant list what their LSA is. And so it's very, very clear to you all if it meets that regulation or not. Sometimes, it's very rare, but you usually see all the hardscapes someone's going to add. Now, pools are an exception to that. The only requirements we have for pools is that they're screened from street view, and fences are required for pool security either way through the zoning ordinance. Sometimes people choose to do at-grade terraces, patios in their backyard, which you don't typically see. So that would be a way to ensure that you see all that information before it's permitted. So I'm going to move on unless you guys have any other questions about that. Okay, so for commercial, what we have given is more clear recommendations on the placement of rooftop patios, terraces, or decks onto the roofs of historic buildings. meaning that we are recommending against the placement of rooftop patios, terraces, and decks on the roofs of historic
Thank you.
buildings. That they could be appropriate for new buildings, but that would need to be something that you review as part of that infill, new construction proposal. What we'd look for there is that these are modern features that you don't see on historical equivalents, so they would need to be designed intentionally in a way that you don't feel those so strongly from the street view. We also talk a lot more about massing and scale of new construction to be consistent with the historic buildings on the block face. We do anticipate as a community that there is some, albeit not a lot, but there is some redevelopment potential in our downtown area. So we want to be very clear and provide continued guidance on what we'd like those new buildings to look like. That we really want to see the mass broken up, and that it be more of a feeling that, they could be separate buildings up and down the street with some breaks in between, or the same building but built with facade breaks, so it would give more of an organic or historic typical appearance. So to get at that, it's the last guideline I've written here, but it would be spacing those buildings to really try to address the historic precedent established on that same block face or across the street, if there's nothing established on that existing block face. As I mentioned, we do have chapters for sign classifications. Each sign type is illustrated. The sign types and terminology match our zoning ordinance, and we do provide guidance for those residential infill neighborhoods for signage. We have expanded guidance on sign lighting pretty extensively. I'm very excited about this section. I look forward to your comments on it, but we provide guidance and additional flexibility for buildings with access stairwells as well. So, for example, we have a lot of buildings on Main Street that have a storefront, and then there's one single door that's also on that storefront that goes straight up stairs to another business. So a lot of times we have requests, well, I want a sign for my business as well. So limiting sign count within the historic district is very important to prevent visual clutter, but it also presents some issues with being equitable in how we allow folks to have signs. So we do provide some clear and guidance and some flexibility to allow for signage in those circumstances, and we did cover that with you a few meetings ago and address that based on your comments. Building lighting is also something we've expanded, and we've also talked about not only the fixtures, but illumination considerations, like the tone of lighting, the direction it's placed, that you're not using lighting to specifically light up architectural features, but just to denote entrances and exits. It's getting late, right? So we've been very methodical in how we've approached that. As for accessory structures, again, we've tried to address the scale congruency and dormers. The biggest guideline change we propose is that we limit upper stories to no more than 60% of the square footage of the bottom floor. So what that is doing is truly creating a 1.5-story accessory structure, which would be the maximum proposed by our zoning ordinance in these districts. We do have treatment for non-historic buildings. There is a lot more flexibility written in this section. I would really appreciate you perusing that chapter and giving me some feedback on that. But there's no specific percentage recommendations listed for additions to non-historic buildings. It simply says that they should be in scale with surrounding historic buildings. So there's some guidance on it not being overly scaled, but when it comes to 50% or 60%, there is no hard number listed there. And that's based on the commission's activities for treatment of non-historic buildings. The commission has been more flexible with those. We do have a section on modern features that would address things like rooftop features, skylights, security bars, things that have come before the commission in the past. Our glossary is very much enhanced now, and it features some commonly used terms. It does actually have some photographs and graphics to help show things like roof shape. I have people that ask me, well, what do you mean by hip to roof? So I can definitely just show them that in the glossary. Different types of windows are probably the most common questions. What is a simulated divided light versus a true divided light? Things of that nature. So the next steps would be that I'm going to schedule a meeting with each of you as desired between, after the holidays and January 14th to try to capture your thoughts before our neighborhood meeting on the 19th. And then I'll collect that information, the public information, and we'll analyze that and revise our public document accordingly so that we could release it for the final draft on March 4th. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I do have one comment, and it has to do with chimney caps. And just something I'd like to ask board members to drive around town and look at some of the chimney caps, especially over at Doug and Julie Fisher's old house on Bridge Street and at Marie Jordan's place, which is that old part of Murfreesboro Road, and look at the chimney caps there and some of the others and see what your opinion is on the appropriateness of that style, on historic chimneys and structures.
I appreciate that. I did get your email about that, and I forwarded it to my account where I'm keeping all the recommendations and definitely have it on my list of things to add to the final draft. But I'd love your specific feedback, if you have any, when I meet with you on what you'd like to see with that guideline. Whether it's defining which types of chimneys should have chimney caps, or just being more specific of what a chimney cap should look like in relation to the material of the existing chimney, the date of construction, et cetera.
I'm assuming these are functioning chimneys or functioning fireplaces.
I'm assuming they are too.
Because we've got them on ours, but they're not functioning fireplaces.
The ones you'll see, they have a roof structure.
Okay.
Actually, to the cap that goes beyond the chimney. And then they have a gap probably of a foot or more.
It's another design element.
It is a design element.
It is, and it's one, regretfully, sometimes we forget to ask about when we're doing a review of without much complexity. So to Brian's point, having more specific guidance on that could help us have something by which to make sure that we consider when we're approving new
good.
construction or additions.
Good point.
I mean, I have a question.
Sure.
Do we get a printout?
If you want one, I can certainly print one out for you. I know that Ms. Pierce has one. Does anyone want a hard copy? I know some people prefer
Not
the-
at this stage. I don't want one right
That
now.
flipping book is so awesome though, guys. But if you want to
No,
see a
I've
hard
got,
copy,
I can see it online, so it's,
okay, if you want a hard copy, please email me and I will certainly print one out for you and I'll let you know when it's ready to pick up.
And you'll even punch it like?
I'll even punch it like hers.
I've got to get a note.
I can do that with the heavy duty printers. I can't do it by
No,
hand.
you did. I would like that.
but it's a marked, I will say it's a marked improvement over what we've been using. I mean, the features in there, the graphic interface and it's just a dramatic improvement.
Well, thank you very
Yes,
much.
it is.
And I know a lot of work has gone into getting it to this stage.
Yes,
Yes.
we're very proud, and we haven't had our neighborhood meeting yet, of course, but we have had a lot of favorable feedback from citizens.
Well, but you got a process still to go, and there'll be some tweaks, no doubt. But
Yes.
that's fine. That's why you got a good foundation here, though, to
Right.
build on.
Well,
And
thank you.
Can the draft be downloaded or saved as a PDF currently?
I believe so. So on this page,
Now,
this
that's a
is
good
this is the website. One thing I wanted to show you is that it's flipping book, design guidelines. You can change this last number. to-
Push your button.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. You can change the last number to whatever the page number is. So I can, for example, if someone says, I'm having trouble understanding what the guidelines are for commercial signs, I can say, okay, well, I'll send you the link. And I can just take this link right here and send it
Bingo.
to them. It goes exactly to the
great.
page. It's very exciting. And then also too, it's the table of contents is clickable, so it goes to whatever page. You can click here. So it's very, very exciting. But again, if you want a hard copy, I'm happy to give you one. I think I like marking stuff up too. I certainly get that.
I'd just like to thank Amanda for spearheading this project, which has taken over a year to reframe and restructure all of the historic district design guidelines. And I'd like to thank Victoria for her work in testing the guidelines after the draft has gone out and some of the research that she's done as part of the update. And I'd also like to thank Annette Dalrymple. She's on our staff, and she is the mastermind behind the flipping book and is able to put all of this into InDesign for publishing that makes it so incredibly user-friendly. So we've got a really great team.
Yes,
Yes,
thank
we
you.
do.
Please convey
Right.
our gratitude to
Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't think we have a clue how much work you guys do,
Yeah.
but we
And that's in
appreciate it.
addition to the other things that Amanda does
Right, right.
and Victoria do during the week.
Yes.
Well, we're
This
really
is your homework.
Yes, this is considered a special project on top, but it's what is, we're hoping is very meaningful, and like Mr. Denton said, it may help with, just increasing understanding, awareness, and certainly communicating with our applicants more effectively. So I do hope that, that's always been the goal, that this framework is something that is far more intuitive than what we have now. It's my favorite thing about it, is this framework.
All right, is that it? We're,
Yes, I'll be in touch.
motion to adjourn? Josh, second. Mary, I see her
Second.
smiling.
Yeah.
So, Merry Christmas to all.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
To all a good night.
That's right, amen.